There are mysteries in the world that quietly resist the force of scientific explanation, phenomena that sit at the edge of our understanding and beckon us to wonder if human beings are far more sensitive to the rhythms of the earth than we allow ourselves to believe. One of the most fascinating of these mysteries is the story of people who claim to feel the shaking of the earth before it begins, men and women who report sensations, visions, discomforts, or overwhelming impressions moments, hours, or sometimes even days before an earthquake strikes. They speak of pressure in the head, ringing in the ears, unease in the chest, a profound fatigue, or an anxiety without cause. They describe it as if their bodies, in some quiet and hidden way, are tuned to the pulse of the planet, to vibrations that most of us cannot recognize, to signals that science has yet to fully translate. And whether these reports are purely coincidental, products of the mind, or glimpses of a hidden form of human perception, they form a captivating starting point for our journey. Because if the earth whispers before it moves, and if some people can truly feel that whisper, then what does it mean about the bond between humanity and the natural world? And what does it tell us about the forgotten capacities of human senses, perhaps left behind over centuries of civilization, yet never fully extinguished? From the very first time a culture experienced the violent shaking of land, people have looked for patterns, for warnings, for the smallest clue that might give them some measure of safety or understanding. They observed the way animals would stir, sometimes vanishing from villages hours before a quake. They noticed unusual odors in the air, strange lights, unexplained clouds, or an eerily still silence over the land. And alongside these natural clues were the individuals who described inexplicable stirrings within themselves, as though their nervous systems responded to invisible waves of energy just before the Earth's upheaval. Stories of such sensitivity circulate quietly, often shared as anecdotes among families who survived disasters, and though they may be dismissed by skeptics, they persist as threads of human experience that are difficult to ignore. In this way, the subject draws us not only toward science but also toward the realm of human intuition, folklore, and the delicate edge between measurable fact and human impression. Imagine for a moment the enormity of what it would mean if such sensitivity were proven real. Earthquakes are events that arrive without mercy, often without sufficient warning, spreading destruction in an instant. Across centuries, scientists have built seismographs, mapped tectonic boundaries, and measured the energies that ripple through bedrock. And yet, despite all of this knowledge, predicting the exact moment an earthquake will happen remains one of the hardest challenges in earth science. Humanity has long dreamed of an early warning system embedded not in machines, but in the human body itself. To think that within our bones, our tissues, our minds, there might exist an ancient form of perception honed in prehistoric times, a survival instinct tuned to the tremors of a restless planet, is to open the door to a vision of humanity both vulnerable and extraordinary. That vision becomes the entry point to our exploration, a merging of scientific curiosity and human wonder. Part of the atmosphere of this mystery comes from the uncertain nature of perception itself. When someone claims to have felt unwell or overwhelmed before the ground shook, we cannot step inside their mind to measure the experience. We can only listen and compare. This is precisely what gives the topic such resonance in a sleep documentary, for it reminds us that reality is often filtered through perception, through sensation, and through the hidden layers of our nervous system. While one person hears only silence, another claims to hear a dull humming. While one person feels nothing, another describes a weight pressing upon their skull. The uniqueness of human experience becomes both frustrating to science and enchanting to mystery. We are caught in the space between the objective and the subjective, between the tremors beneath the crust and the tremors within the human body. If we imagine the history of humankind stretching back tens of thousands of years, it is reasonable to think that early humans would have needed every possible edge to survive. They lived without seismographs, without news broadcasts, without safety nets. When the earth shook or the sea rose, survival depended on instinct, on an acute awareness of subtle changes in the environment. Some scientists believe that our nervous systems may still hold residues of those sharp senses, perhaps dulled by modern life but not entirely gone. If so, the small subset of people today who report earthquake sensitivity may simply be attuned to remnants of a once common instinct. It is a humbling perspective that suggests human beings are not separate observers of the earth, but participants in its living rhythm. We may pause here, letting the mind linger over this possibility. For those who listen as they enter rest, perhaps aware of their own heartbeat and breath, the idea resonates: we are not disconnected from the world but immersed in it, bound to it, sensitive to its unseen movements. The mystery of sensing earthquakes is therefore not only a scientific riddle but a deeply philosophical question, for it asks us to consider the link between human beings and the ground that sustains them. Such reflection has always carried a dreamlike atmosphere, for it invites us to picture ourselves as instruments, each one of us carrying a quiet seismograph within, sensitive to vibrations lost on more deliberate machines. In exploring this idea, it is important to acknowledge the layers of complexity. The Earth itself is never silent. Vibrations ripple constantly, from ocean waves, wind patterns, underground magma, and countless sources of energy. The human nervous system might react to one subtle pattern amidst thousands. This raises a central question: are those who claim sensitivity misinterpreting ordinary fluctuations, or are they catching cues that most humans ignore? It is an open question, still without final answers, but it carries the kind of peace and wonder so central to this journey of listening. By opening ourselves to these ideas, we trace the ancient bond between the inner life of the human body and the enormous power of the planet below. There are also the natural parallels that make the idea feel less impossible. Animals, after all, have long been documented as exhibiting agitation before earthquakes. Dogs bark, cats hide, birds flee, fish leap from ponds. Entire colonies of insects sometimes stir before the first tremor. If animals show this connection without doubt, why should it be unthinkable that humans, coded by the same natural laws, might also display it, even if more faintly? To admit this is not to abandon science but to acknowledge the continuum of life and sensation across species. We might then reframe the question, not whether humans can sense earthquakes but why only a few seem to do so consistently. And here enters the rich field of speculation. Some researchers suggest that certain people have unusually sensitive balance organs, small crystals in the inner ear that respond to shifts in vibration. Others point toward the perception of low-frequency sounds beyond the reach of ordinary hearing, known as infrasound, which often accompany tectonic movements. There are even studies exploring subtle changes in atmospheric pressure, electric currents, and magnetic fields before quakes. Each of these could, in theory, be translated into human sensation. Such speculation creates a picture of the human body as a multidimensional receiver, continually sensing more than we consciously know. The mystery is not whether signals exist but how rarely we notice them, how often they vanish into background noise until someone claims, in hindsight, that they felt something before the world shifted. The opening exploration of this topic does not demand belief or disbelief, but a relaxation into curiosity. For those listening, resting, perhaps on the edge of sleep, it is a gentle invitation to consider that the human experience is vaster, stranger, and more beautiful than we often realize. To imagine that your body could be in quiet dialogue with the Earth's crust is to let go of certainty and enter the realm of wonder. It is also to reframe earthquakes, not only as disasters but as conversations in geological time, events that carry signals and warnings which some people, in mysterious ways, might still receive. In dwelling on this thought, one begins to feel the slowness and depth of the natural world stretching beneath the surface of daily life, beyond the things we see, into the foundation we cannot escape. Thus the stage is set for our continued journey. We stand at the threshold of a subject that is simultaneously scientific, personal, and mystical. As listeners drift deeper into this stream of thought, the perspective widens. We look not only at the immediate experiences of people who sense earthquakes but also at the long history of humanity's search for warnings in nature. The idea that some people can feel an earthquake before it happens is more than a superstition, it is a story about connection, survival, and perception. It tells us that the Earth and the human body may be linked in ways so intimate that explanation has not yet caught up. And it leaves us with an open door, a sense of expectancy, and a depth of calm curiosity that will guide us through what follows. Throughout human history, long before the instruments of science were constructed, the Earth announced its presence through the memories and stories of those who lived upon it. Traditions that reach back thousands of years remind us that people did not always separate inner sensations from outer events the way we often do today. What was felt in the body could be understood as a reflection of what was stirring in the land. When someone reported uneasy dreams, unusual body pain, or a sudden dizziness, it was not uncommon for a community to take those signs as warnings. In societies close to the Earth, where survival often depended on interpreting the smallest signals in nature, these sensations were not brushed aside as coincidence but noted as part of the fabric of experience. As the ground beneath villages shook without warning, people grew convinced that the body, too, gave early trembling whispers. And so began the long human habit of connecting inner sensation to the greater forces of geology and sky. Walking through ancient stories, one finds accounts that acknowledge premonitions with striking detail. In Greece, in Japan, in China, across the Mediterranean, tales have been preserved of individuals who foresaw calamities, either through dreams or bodily discomforts that seemed without cause until the earth finally convulsed. Priests, seers, and sages were often described as those who could tune into lines of power beneath the earth, their visions granted not by mystical divinity alone but by a sensitivity to forces at work below. To us these may appear as folklore, but to those who relied on memory to explain natural convulsions, they were necessary truths. These stories formed part of cultural memory, binding people together through explanation and ritual, even as the earth reminded them of their fragility. The reverence given to such individuals suggests that foreknowledge, or even the possibility of it, was precious. A village that believed one among them could feel quakes in advance found both fear and comfort in that reality. Fear, because the prediction of shaking reminded them that safety was temporary. Comfort, because to sense even a faint warning meant that the unknown was no longer absolute, that the ground did not destroy without announcing itself. Such dynamics pulse through oral storytelling, giving later generations a pattern to observe. We might imagine those ancient evenings, fires burning in clay lamps, storytellers recalling the time when someone felt sick at heart before the shaking came, or when elders warned of a restless energy underground. It is within these narratives that the roots of earthquake sensitivity first entered human speech, and once spoken, they never fully vanished. Anthropologists studying these accounts note how often they intertwine with animals. In Chinese texts, the sudden restlessness of oxen, horses, and dogs before earthquakes is recorded alongside the trembling feelings of people. In Japan, carp leaping in ponds were read as omens, coupled with reports of headaches or ringing ears among villagers. Such coincidences became a pattern of signs. Often, humans placed their own sensations within the same category as animal behavior, part of a continuum of living beings responding to a restless earth. In this way, nature and humanity were not considered separate but bound in mutual sensitivity. If the birds took flight at dusk without reason, and if a grandmother complained of pressure in her head, these were woven into a single tapestry of warning. The fact that stories repeated across cultures gives us reason to pause, for repetition across time and space points to shared human observations, not isolated imagination. Some legends go further, suggesting that entire clans or families were known for feeling tremors before they occurred. Oral traditions in mountain communities carry tales of ancestors who became uneasy before faults ruptured. One can hear echoes of this in later folklore, where bloodlines carried gifts of perception, passed like inheritance. Whether literal or symbolic, such notions suggest that people recognized variations in sensitivity, that not all were equal in perceiving subtle cues of the earth. From generation to generation, families may have noted patterns in those who grew unwell ahead of quakes, teaching younger members to heed their sensations. In that cultural setting, perception that might be dismissed today as imagination became validated, respected, and preserved. These old traditions remind us that the line between mythology and science is not always sharply drawn. Many myths emerge from repeated human experience, preserved through symbolism until explanation becomes available. The case of earthquake premonitions follows the same arc. What one era framed as divine omen, another may examine as sensory perception. In this way, the continuity of folklore becomes striking evidence that the experience itself, the bodily unease before shaking, persisted across geography and centuries. Its meanings were interpreted differently depending on time and culture, but the raw ingredient was the same: someone felt that something was wrong, and soon the ground confirmed it. As we consider these streams of history, we can envision life in earlier centuries, where the absence of technology sharpened reliance on human awareness. Without seismographs or structured alerts, people turned fully to what their senses revealed. For a farmer watching the Earth's signals each day, the unusual was meaningful. Sudden silence in fields, detours in birdsong, wind shifting without reason, and personal sensations of heaviness could all signal that something larger was about to occur. These communities did not separate the body from the land but understood them as intimately joined. To modern ears the notion may sound mystical, but seen from another angle it is simply attentive living, a habit of being close to one's environment, refined over millennia of dependence. Certain rituals may even have grown from these observations. Before quakes, ceremonies often took place in temples, designed not only to appease gods but to acknowledge the eerie sensations people carried. To externalize fear through ritual was a way of validating those uneasy feelings, even when no rational explanation was available. The dance between fear of the earth and attentiveness to its signals left a cultural inheritance that lingers in subtle ways today. Superstitions about atmospheric stillness, about animals changing behavior, about restless dreams, all echo this older dialogue between sensation and land. One cannot overstate the role of oral tradition in keeping these patterns alive. For countless centuries, before literacy spread, people depended on stories spoken aloud to shape memory. When a story is told repeatedly that the old man grew dizzy before the rocks slid down the hills, or that the child cried through the night before waves swallowed the coast, the narrative becomes a coded form of early science, preserving cause and effect for posterity. Even if the details were embroidered, the essence, that humans and quakes are linked through sensation, was delivered across generations. And memory cares little for strict accuracy. What matters is that the connection survives, allowing subsequent listeners to remain alert. It is in this oral web that the earliest documentation of seismic sensitivity survives, though it comes packaged in the language of myth. Modern readers may find these traditions poetic but unconvincing. Yet, to dismiss them outright is to forget that much of science has always begun as observation without explanation. It is only centuries later that the tools of measurement catch up to the sensations people described before. The same may hold true for the earthquake narratives of old. Where villagers spoke of dizziness, electrometers might later register shifts in magnetic fields. Where they complained of ear pressure, instruments might one day detect subtle changes in infrasound. In this possibility lies the continuity between folklore and experiment. Both begin with unusual perception, both search for a mechanism. The difference is only in framework. In reflecting on these histories, there is also the contemplative mood drawn forth by their timelessness. We picture entire civilizations living in respect and fear of the earth, tethered to forces beyond their control, sensing patterns by way of the body and then shaping those impressions into stories that calmed, warned, or guided. The thought itself is calming, a reminder that we are inheritors of long ages of perception, that the sensation of unease before disaster has shaped not just individuals but cultures. To drift into this idea while resting is to feel continuity with the past, to let imagination carry us back to a time when every shadow of experience mattered, and every tingle in the body might foreshadow the roar of the ground. If we allow ourselves to be drawn more deeply into this continuity, we begin to see that the mystery of earthquake sensitivity is not isolated but woven into the broader human quest to predict the future. Across cultures, dreams, omens, and bodily sensations were all interpreted as early warnings of disasters, earthquakes, storms, famines. The universality of such practices suggests that anticipation, the desire to feel what comes before it arrives, is among the most primal of human longings. And while predictions in the past often dissolved into superstition, they were nevertheless based in the lived reality of people who had nothing else but their senses. If the prediction helped even once, it justified its preservation. And slowly, these survival stories became cultural memory, always returning to the same point: some people feel, and when they feel, the earth soon follows. What makes these historical stories so compelling for us now is not only their content but their persistence. They survived the erosion of centuries, carried through language into the modern world. That endurance testifies to their resonance. It suggests that, whether or not science has validated it fully, people continue to witness the phenomenon enough to repeat it. And in repeating, they affirm that something was indeed present. A myth that lacks resonance vanishes quickly, only myths that echo genuine experience endure. Earthquake sensitivity belongs to the second category, persisting in quiet whispers through cultural inheritance because again and again, people noticed. From this perspective, the stories begin to serve not merely as folklore but as an archive. They are a proto-science disguised in narrative clothing, awaiting rediscovery. If we read them not as superstition but as coded observation, we may find hints of phenomena worth investigating. And so the arc bends from ancient firesides to the laboratories of today. Sensations of dizziness, heaviness, unexplained fear, these are not easily measurable, but they are reported consistently throughout time. The fact that they appear across continents suggests that human bodies may indeed register subtle aspects of seismic preparation, even if our instruments are still learning how to listen the same way. As we drift further into this exploration, it becomes clear that history does not present us with isolated stories of curiosity but with a chorus of voices repeating the same perception. That chorus, spanning centuries, pulls our attention into a timeless flow, where inner sensation speaks without a world. In this flow, the boundary between folklore and fact dissolves, and the continuity of human experience shines through. It is soothing to rest in this current of connection, for it reassures us that even across centuries of change, humans have remained bound to the rhythms of the earth in ways deeper than conscious choice. The notion itself begins to breathe tranquility, like a soft hum beneath the movements of time, carrying us into deeper reflection. In every age of human history, there has been a fascination with the relationship between people and the animals that live beside them. When humans began to notice patterns in the natural world around earthquakes, animals quickly became part of this story, for they seemed to respond to the shifts of the earth with an urgency and clarity that the majority of humans did not. Dogs began to pace or whine, horses stampeded without visible cause, birds fell silent or scattered into the air as if fleeing some invisible threat. Fish broke the surfaces of ponds in sudden leaps. Insects swarmed or disappeared, leaving fields strangely empty. These reactions long stood as signals to observant communities that something unusual could be approaching. Even before scientific instruments existed, these animal responses were recorded carefully in text and memory alike. The recognition that animals sense something beyond the range of ordinary human perception is widespread, and it continues to be one of the clearest arguments for reconsidering human sensitivity as well. If the same planet that trembles beneath our feet provides detectable signs to birds, dogs, or fish, then nothing prevents the possibility that humans also register these signals, even if more subtly. The link may not always be obvious or consistent, but the biological truth remains: humans are, like all creatures, wired with senses that extend into a field of environmental awareness. If animals can act as early detectors, then perhaps humans once did as well, and in some cases still do, though the layer of perception is quieter, hidden under the noise of modern life. The stories of animals acting as heralds of seismic events are especially well documented in regions where earthquakes have shaped culture for millennia. In China, official records stretching back more than 2,000 years describe how swarms of snakes, rats, or domestic animals behaved strangely prior to sudden shaking. In Japan, collections of folk notes remind us that cats and crows were carefully watched by villagers, their unexpected movements seen as meaningful. Similarly, reports from Italy, Greece, and throughout South America tell of shepherds who trusted the patterns of their animals more than the stillness of the earth. Observing animals gave people ways to prepare or at least to place themselves in a state of readiness. It kept them within the ancient dialogue of earth and life, where signs were always interpreted as warnings, never as coincidences. But within these stories of animals lies an important comparison, for when animals react, humans often do too. Many of the accounts that describe panicked dogs or vanishing birds also mention individuals who felt uneasy hours or days before the earthquake began. These people described restless dreams, sudden stomach discomfort, inexplicable headaches, or surges of anxiety that seemed to arrive from nowhere. Like the animals, they embodied a kind of anticipation, only theirs was harder to categorize. Animals running to higher ground can be seen and agreed upon. But the sensations of a few sensitive humans are felt only within the boundaries of the body, easily doubted or dismissed. Yet to place them beside the stories of animals reveals something powerful. Both share a context of anticipation, both occur before the disaster, both carry the weight of unexplained foreknowledge. Our understanding of biology supports this continuity, even if we cannot fully explain it. Animals and humans share similar nervous systems, built on the same cellular structures, designed to detect danger and preserve life. The difference lies not in architecture but in degree and focus. While animals remain instinctively tuned to shifts in vibration, air pressure, and magnetic alignment, humans have cultivated other priorities. Languages, technologies, and cities distract the nervous system from signals once central to survival. But distraction is not erasure. The machinery remains. Those who report symptoms before earthquakes may be drawing unconsciously from the same nervous foundation as the animal that flees at the slightest tremor. This connection reminds us that sensitivity to the earth is not a separate phenomenon but part of a broader spectrum of life responding to the same invisible triggers. Consider the example of infrasound, sound waves below the range of human hearing, produced by tectonic movements and natural stress deep in the earth. Animals often respond to these frequencies with agitation. And though humans cannot consciously hear them, our bodies may still register their presence. The inner ear and balance systems are sensitive to vibrations and pressure shifts. When those systems detect patterns beyond conscious awareness, they can create feelings of unease, dizziness, headaches, or even nausea. A person may never identify what caused the sensation, only that it came unpredictably, hours before the ground began to break apart. This idea reinforces the bond between animals and humans, not as equals in sensing but as fellow creatures able to share the signals of the same planet. The continuity between human sensations and animal behavior strengthens when we examine moments of catastrophe. In the hours before the major earthquake of 1975 in Haicheng, countless reports described unusual animal behavior. Dogs howled, snakes appeared in the snow, and livestock grew restless. But alongside these were reports of people feeling dizzy, restless, or burdened with an overwhelming heaviness. Such combined evidence led Chinese officials to issue warnings that entered the city and saved lives before the quake struck. While the scientific justification centered on observed foreshocks and calculations, the broader memory of the event always included testimony about animal disturbances and human sensations. It suggests that in moments of heightened observation, differences between species dissolve into a collective awareness of the approaching tremor. Folklore and history alike reveal that people learned to respect this continuity. Farmers and fishers noticed both the changes in their animals and the changes in themselves. By weaving these signals together, they crafted practical knowledge that guided behavior. Sometimes they moved herds, sometimes they stayed watchful, and sometimes they performed rituals of protection. What mattered most was not whether the sensations belonged to a person or an animal, but that both could serve as indicators that the landscape was preparing to move. Over time, such practices deepened the belief that humans and animals share the same perceptive fabric, woven together by the earth itself. In reflecting on this partnership, we see that it is not merely about warning signals but about the larger truth of connection. Earthquakes remind us that life is inseparable from the crust beneath, and that sensitivity to the ground is not the possession of one species alone. To rest in this thought is soothing, for it shifts the focus from personal burden to shared experience. If birds, fish, dogs, and humans alike react before earthquakes, then we are part of a greater whole, joined in an unspoken dialogue with the planet. This realization has the power to ease the mind, to remind us that awareness does not isolate us but places us within a community of living beings bound by the same hidden vibrations. As we drift further, it becomes important to acknowledge that the survival value of such sensitivity has always been profound. Long before cities and towers, humans lived in landscapes where disasters carried little warning. Those who could sense change, whether through watching animals or feeling it in themselves, might have given their families the chance to move to safety. Natural selection could thus have preserved a faint thread of sensitivity across generations. We inherit traces of this ancient strategy, even if mutation and lifestyle have muted them. Still, some individuals exhibit the legacy more strongly, finding themselves inexplicably affected by approaching seismic change. They stand as living reminders that nature does not forget, that what was useful in one age may persist in fragments in another. Scientific studies into this connection are ongoing, and while results remain debated, they open fascinating pathways of thought. Might the same instincts that lead animals to flee sudden shifts also awaken uneasily in human dreams? Could the same sensory thresholds that trigger flight in a flock also contribute to headaches or fatigue in sensitive individuals? The parallels suggest continuity rather than coincidence. Each may represent different expressions of the same underlying network, life responding to subtle of Earth. To dwell on this possibility is to feel a widening awe, for it brings us closer not only to animals but to the planet itself, reminding us that we are all participants in a much older system of communication. It is this meditative awareness that transforms the subject from curiosity into meditation. As listeners drift with these ideas, perhaps in the quiet of their own rooms, it becomes easier to imagine the invisible lattice of signals flowing around us every moment. Some reach the ears of birds, some stir the instincts of fish, and some ripple through the blood and minds of people who hardly know why they feel what they do. The planet speaks in a language of vibration, and perception is the translation. Though few may understand the words, all of life hears the conversation. Even in sleep, our breathing bodies echo this rhythm, in harmony with a world that never stops moving beneath the surface. When the body becomes the focus of this mystery, the sense of wonder deepens, for we begin to recognize that within the folds of flesh and bone there may lie instruments far older than any seismograph, organs, and tissues that whisper quietly of forces pressing from below the surface of the earth. We tend to think of our bodies as limited to the 5 familiar senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, but biology has shown us that human perception is far more expansive. Balance, proprioception, sensitivity to heat, to acceleration, to magnetic fields, to pressure, these too are part of the web of our sensory life. And though they remain largely hidden beneath consciousness, they continue to shape our awareness in ways that are often mysterious, surfacing at moments when the environment speaks in subtle ways. If some people can feel earthquakes before they begin, then perhaps the explanation lies not in supernatural visions, but in a more intimate truth that the human body is inherently designed to notice what seems otherwise invisible. One place to look lies deep within the architecture of the ear. The inner ear contains delicate organs, the semicircular canals, and the vestibule filled with fluid and tiny crystals of calcium carbonate that shift with motion. These are the organs that tell us we are moving forward or backward, tilting, falling, spinning. They are exquisitely sensitive to vibration and balance, so much so that even the faint movement of a train or the sway of a boat can disrupt them. It is not unreasonable to think that the subtle tremors generated by pressure within the crust might disturb this system in ways that extend beyond conscious balance, producing dizziness or disorientation before the first perceivable earthquake arrives. To those who have experienced such symptoms, the explanation may be that their vestibular organs are more reactive than most, tuned to disturbances in a way that turns the imperceptible into felt sensation. Another possibility comes from the auditory system, which, though limited in conscious hearing to a certain range, is still affected by vibrations outside of it. Low-frequency sounds, known as infrasound, are produced by storms, volcanic activity, landslides, and yes, also by tectonic shifts before quakes. These frequencies, too low for the ear to interpret as distinct tones, nevertheless cause pressure sensations, headaches, or unease. They may manifest as a ringing in the ears, a subtle echo that registers not as sound but as discomfort. Those who report such experiences could be detecting the infrasound of a restless earth, moments or hours before it releases its tension in a quake. It is a form of hearing beyond hearing, proof that the body perceives more than the conscious mind acknowledges. Beyond the ears, the skin itself becomes relevant. Our largest organ, it carries thousands of receptors capable of sensing vibration, temperature, and pressure. When subjected to subtle shifts in barometric pressure, electrostatic charge, or low-grade tremors, the nervous endings within skin may transmit faint signals to the brain. These could emerge as tingling, pressure, or even an undefined sense that something is wrong. Sensitive individuals frequently describe feelings that are difficult to articulate: a buzzing beneath the skin, heaviness in the limbs, sudden tension in the chest. Though easy to dismiss, these sensations may represent the body's raw language, primitive channels of communication arising from the immediate environment. The nervous system does not stop at the skin, of course, but extends inward to the brain itself, where countless electrochemical exchanges can shift in response to environmental conditions. There is growing curiosity about whether fluctuations in geomagnetic activity, often associated with geological stress, might influence brain waves. Though evidence remains debated, there are intriguing reports of headaches, insomnia, mood swings, and difficulty concentrating before earthquakes. These symptoms resemble the responses of the brain to magnetic field variations in scientific studies. If the Earth's shifting plates generate such changes, then the brain, electric by nature, may attune itself unconsciously. What feels like intuition or anxiety to the individual may in fact be the nervous system responding faithfully to signals it cannot articulate in words. Furthermore, the body is sensitive to something as subtle as air pressure. The pressure of the atmosphere is not fixed but constantly shifting, and the smallest changes can be felt by people prone to migraines, joint pain, or sinus discomfort. Before an earthquake, ground pressure changes sometimes ripple into the air, generating gradients that the body interprets as heaviness or constriction. Many sensitive individuals explain that before tremors, they feel an unusual weight pressing upon their head or chest, as though the air itself had grown thicker. This perception, though intangible to instruments, may be another biological pathway whereby humans anticipate unseen movements below. What makes these reflections especially mesmerizing is the realization that all of these systems, vestibular, auditory, cutaneous, neural, and respiratory, coexist within every human body. They are not foreign gifts given to a few rare individuals but universal organs present in us all. Some may live with heightened thresholds, experiencing the Earth's murmur more readily than others, but the machinery resides within everyone. We are all receivers, even if some of us live on muted channels. To think of the body in these terms is to shift perspective. Instead of asking whether people can sense earthquakes, we may instead wonder why so many of us have forgotten how to listen. Scientific experiments have begun to probe these questions, though results are often subtle, elusive, difficult to reproduce. Studies of people during periods of seismic unrest have shown inconsistent but intriguing patterns, clusters of reported discomfort, changes in blood pressure, elevated cortisol levels, shifts in sleep quality. These observations may be too imprecise for strict prediction, but when mapped onto later quake events, they hint that the human body is aware on levels we do not fully track. It is as though beneath conscious perception another rhythm operates, the deep primordial rhythm that once protected our ancestors before walls, machines, and rational skepticism dulled its voice. This draws attention to an essential paradox. Science strives for measurable, repeatable data, and so it often distrusts subjective report. Yet the phenomenon under discussion lives precisely in subjectivity, in what people feel. The dizziness, the unease, the strange sense of foreboding cannot be captured on paper in the same way as seismograph data. And yet, to ignore them is to ignore centuries of testimony. Here lies the value of humility, the recognition that human experience is itself a form of data, one that may lead to future measurements once tools become subtle enough. Until then, we drift between belief and disbelief, anchored not in proof but in possibility. And possibility, especially when spoken gently in the quiet of night, can be just as comforting as certainty. It is also worth contemplating how such bodily sensitivity shapes the very definition of our relationship to the earth. We tend to imagine the surface beneath us as external, as something entirely separate. But when our organs react to subtle tremors before they are outwardly visible, it implies that the boundary between self and world is far thinner than we admit. Our bodies are not isolated but porous, resonant instruments continually playing back the symphony of external forces. We are not outside of nature, but within it, joined to its vibrations and pulses. To feel before an earthquake is to embody this truth directly, to become momentarily aware that the ground and the body are not strangers, but companions, moving together in unseen dance. There is also something profoundly soothing in realizing that these mysterious bodily stirrings may be protective rather than arbitrary. Anxiety, headaches, restlessness, these may appear inconvenient, but within them could be hidden messages, the nervous system urging caution, readiness, survival. Viewed with this perspective, discomfort becomes communication, not mere malfunction. The body is not betraying us but speaking the language of Earth, a language we have forgotten how to trust. Allowing the mind to rest inside this notion can transform fear into fascination, offering comfort to the listener even as it opens the imagination to unseen dimensions of human existence. As the night deepens and the thought flows further, the sheer enormity of the body's potential as a sensing device unfolds like an ocean. We have lived so long amid machines and screens that we have forgotten the living intelligence of the body itself. It remembers what we do not, perceives what our conscious thoughts overlook. In the whispers of dizziness, in the subtle ache of bone, in the shifting rhythms of breath and pulse, something large speaks to us through the smallest movements. That something is the earth, restless but ancient, inviting us to recognize it not as distant stone but as a partner in our shared existence. The stillness of listening allows us to imagine this partnership in its fullness. A person lying awake at night before an earthquake may feel pressure without cause, chest tight, ears filled with muffled tones. In that moment, though distressed, they are participating in a dialogue as old as life itself. The crust of the earth compresses, vibrations spread through the rock, infrasound ripples into the air, the nervous system translates it into unease, and the mind answers with emotion. A complete circuit is closed, planet to body, body to mind, mind to awareness. Realizing this is to enter into a vast intimacy with the planet, a realization at once humbling and strangely calming. When attention turns from theory and physiology to the testimonies of actual people, the mystery becomes even more alive, for here we find voices from across the world, separated by geography and culture, yet united by accounts of sensations that defy coincidence. There are countless records of individuals who described strange feelings within hours, sometimes even days, before the ground trembled beneath them. These experiences do not rest solely in folklore or vague rumor, but in the lived memories of survivors who told their stories in the aftermath of quakes, hoping that their discomfort might one day be understood rather than ignored. And while science may hesitate, these testimonies stretch like threads, weaving together into a pattern too persistent to dismiss with ease. One of the most striking accounts comes from Italy, a land long shaped by seismic activity. In villages scattered across its hills, survivors of destructive quakes often spoke of uneasy nights filled with nausea, headaches that gripped the skull with unusual force, or strange ringing tones in their ears. Some claimed that in the day before the shaking, they felt as though gravity itself had grown heavier, making it difficult to walk or rise from bed. In certain families, more than one member reported this sensation simultaneously, each describing the same heaviness or dizziness without realizing the other was experiencing it. When interviewed later, they would quietly confess that they felt almost as though the earth had pressed its own weight upon their bodies, forcing them into a state of anticipation they could not name. In Japan, where generational memory retains deep respect for earthquakes, similar testimonies abound. Farmers and townspeople have described waking in the night just before large events, seized by an unnameable sense of dread or agitation. Some wrote of a pounding in the chest, a restless pulse that would not slow, long before the first tremors shook their homes. Mothers recalled children waking in the dark, crying as though startled by something unheard. And when asked why they woke, the children could not explain, merely insisting something was wrong. To those families, the quake confirmed that perception had preceded shaking, turning vague unease into remembered omen, passed from lips to paper as yet another example of the body's untold sensitivity. In California, where modern seismology maintains careful watch, accounts of personal symptoms continue alongside official measurements. Individuals living near major fault zones frequently describe headaches, confusion, or sudden disorientation hours before quakes. Some report unusual pressure in their ears, like the experience of descending suddenly in an airplane. Others recount dreams filled with collapse or shaking that occur just before real seismic events. For many, the similarity of these experiences over years has made them trust their bodies with a seriousness they once lacked. Interviews collected after quakes often reveal people saying, "I knew something was coming, I felt it yesterday," or "I couldn't sleep the night before, my whole body was restless." These statements, though imprecise, are too frequent to vanish into pure accident. They accumulate until they form a body of anecdotal evidence that resonates with the ancient stories of forewarning, creating a continuous line from past to present. And then there are dramatic instances where clusters of people felt disturbances at once. Reports surface of entire neighborhoods complaining of headaches or nausea in the same period prior to a quake. Such collective unease, though rare, lends weight to the argument that environmental conditions affect bodies in subtle but tangible ways before seismic rupture. The problem lies in quantifying these sensations, for the body does not provide graphs or scales, only feelings. Yet the sheer number of witnesses creates a mosaic too intricate to be ignored. Whether in European villages, Asian towns, or American suburbs, the language echoes: pressure, dizziness, fear without reason, fatigue beyond measure. Pain takes particular prominence in these discussions. Migraines are commonly reported, alongside sharp, stabbing sensations behind the eyes or along the temples. These aches do not always yield easily to medicine, vanishing only after the ground has released its tension. Some individuals keep records of such patterns, realizing over years of repetition that the pain is not random but intimately tied to seismic sequences. One woman in Greece documented years of migraines that arrived before local earthquakes and subsided abruptly once the shaking passed. She described it as if her head itself were carrying the stress of the fault lines, releasing her once the earth had shifted. Whether her case was coincidence or genuine perception, her story deepens our sense of how intimate the human experience of earthquakes may be. Dreams, too, hold a place within this collection of testimonies. Across continents, people speak of startling dreams before tremors, dreams of falling buildings, cracking ground, floods rushing through valleys. While skeptics might attribute these to anxiety or chance, their frequency suggests that the subconscious may also register environmental changes. The brain, processing signals too faint for waking recognition, might translate them into symbolic dream imagery. When shared by multiple individuals in the same area before a disaster, these dreams become difficult to dismiss. They hint at a deeper dialogue between body and earth, one conducted even as the conscious mind sleeps. In a documentary for sleep, reflection on such dreams has a hypnotic quality, inviting listeners to wonder about the hidden perceptions that drift through their own slumber each night, whispering in symbols the world they cannot consciously measure. Accounts from sensitive children are especially striking. Parents often note that their youngest members are more candid about strange sensations they feel. Some children report pressure in their ears, ringing tones, or sudden exhaustion before earthquakes. Others become uncharacteristically agitated, restless, or anxious, clinging to parents with words like, "I don't like this place," or "I want to go outside." These spontaneous remarks, untutored by superstition, suggest that young nervous systems may be more open to subtle environmental shifts, unshielded by the rational filters that adults impose. In this way, children's accounts may offer some of the most revealing evidence of unconscious seismic sensing, even if they lack sophistication to describe it clearly. For parents who later connect these behaviors to an earthquake, the impression never fades. The global nature of the testimonies paints an extraordinary picture. From Europe to Asia, the Americas to the Pacific Islands, narratives converge. Each describes in slightly different words a similar core sensation: something shifted in the body before the earth began to move. To note this universality is to feel the intimacy of the shared human condition, our bodies bound to the same restless crust regardless of nationality or faith. It offers comfort in its own way, for it reveals that even amid disaster, humanity's relationship to the earth is consistent across the globe. This consistency hints that what we are addressing is not cultural imagination but a nervous truth waiting for acknowledgement. Skeptics often point out that human memory is selective, that after an earthquake people retroactively link their prior discomforts, forming patterns where none existed. While this possibility is valid, it does not fully account for situations where multiple witnesses independently describe unusual sensations before events, nor does it explain why the same sensory categories repeat across centuries and cultures. Pressure, dizziness, ringing, headaches, dread, these are not random. They appear with too much regularity to be ignored. Perhaps, as science matures, it will develop methods to distinguish coincidence from true perception. Until then, we live in the fertile space of possibility, where uncertainty itself becomes a form of wonder. In some rare instances, people attuned to their bodies have attempted to use their experiences as informal prediction. Everyday citizens, noticing repeated patterns of headaches or unease, have warned friends or family before quakes, sometimes even leaving areas hours in advance. Such actions, though dismissed by official systems, suggest the potential of harnessing human sensitivity as part of community preparedness. While unreliable as a primary method, these stories demonstrate the protective impulse of listening to one's own sensations. Even if outcomes remain uncertain, the practice of noticing oneself becomes a mode of relationship with the earth, an acknowledgement that we are not bystanders to natural rhythms, but participants in them. It is when we listen to these voices, scattered across decades and continents, that we begin to feel the accumulating weight of human testimony. Each individual, isolated and vulnerable, may appear insignificant. But together, their stories form a chorus that whispers consistently of hidden awareness. A scientist may look for data points, a skeptic may look for chance. But for those who survive disasters by listening to their bodies, the testimony itself is proof. And while consensus may remain elusive, the resonance these accounts create cannot be denied. Their very persistence across time ensures that the question will not fade. It will return again, as it has for millennia, each time the earth shakes and the people remember what they felt before it came. When told in the quiet of the night, these human records take on a dreamlike quality. They are not announcements of science, nor declarations of myth, but gentle sharings of what it means to be embodied on a restless planet. They ask us to consider that within our ordinary lives lie extraordinary connections, that each of us may be whispering with the earth in ways we scarcely understand. Whether we name it intuition, sensitivity, or coincidence, the sensation is real to those who feel it. Dwelling on it in this meditative flow reveals not fear, but the wonder of being human. For to feel, even imperfectly, is to belong deeply to the world around us, to stand as living evidence that the earth and the body remain endlessly intertwined. When listening to the voices of those who describe their experiences, another element appears again and again, subtle yet insistent, the sensation that the very air has changed. Long before the earth itself begins to shake, people speak of heaviness pressing upon their temples, a dull weight bearing down without visible cause. Some describe it as though the atmosphere itself had thickened, as if each breath carried an invisible burden. Others recall ears filling with pressure, not unlike the feeling of descending in an airplane, the muffled hum pressing inward against the eardrum. In many testimonies, these atmospheric disturbances arrive quietly, registering not as a violent intrusion but as a slow and confusing discomfort. Those who notice them cannot always identify what has changed, only that the air feels different, and that their bodies reflect it with unease. The connection between earthquakes and changes in air pressure may not be immediately intuitive, yet the earth and the sky remain united through invisible forces. As tectonic stress builds beneath the crust, it exerts pressure that can ripple upward, displacing underground gases, shifting groundwater, and altering the balance between land and air. Before earthquakes, subtle emissions of radon or invisible adjustments of strain energy can disturb the ions in the atmosphere. At the same time, movements in subterranean structures may alter the air's density enough for sensitive individuals to register. Science is only beginning to trace these complicated exchanges, but for those who describe headaches, dizziness, or heaviness before quakes, it feels like a bodily confirmation that the boundary between earth and sky is never unbroken. One of the most common sensations is the pain of migraines triggered without apparent cause. Sufferers often note that barometric shifts are among the strongest catalysts of their pain. When pressure drops suddenly before storms, migraines appear, signaling how reactive the human nervous system is to atmospheric instability. It does not require much imagination to extend this to earthquakes, where pressure dynamics can shift beneath the ground, producing faint but far-reaching disturbances in the air above. Those whose bodies already respond to weather may find themselves even more susceptible to seismic variations, suffering head pains and sensory disruption before a quake begins. In their stories, the experience of an earthquake often begins hours ahead with nothing more dramatic than a dull ache at the base of the skull, a pain unnoticed by others around them but persistent enough to remain in their memory once the ground confirms the signal. That sense of ear pressure, too, carries its own fascinating implications. The inner ear is not only a chamber of balance but also sensitive to even slight differences in air density. Subtle decreases or rises in pressure can leave individuals feeling blocked, heavy, or ringing with frequency. One might consider how animals with more acute auditory ranges respond in such circumstances. A dog or bird may anticipate disaster through pitch, while a human, less finely tuned, may only register confusion in the ear canals. Yet that confusion itself, repeated across accounts, stands as evidence that environmental shifts make themselves known inside the body long before instruments detect them. It is an echo chamber in which the vibrations of the earth and the fluctuations of the air converge, translated imperfectly into sensation. Such experiences are not always painful. Some people describe feelings of profound fatigue before earthquakes, a weariness so intense that they are compelled to lie down. They may feel as though the air has thickened into a weight that drags against the muscles, even though their environment appears outwardly unchanged. In reflecting upon such testimonies, one can imagine that the body is burdened not by personal exhaustion but by the atmosphere itself, shifted slightly out of balance by the restless preparations of the earth. To those who feel it, this fatigue possesses an uncanny significance, becoming a bodily whisper of events about to unfold. Similar reports are drawn from those who note the curious silence in the world before quakes. Just as birds may fall silent in sudden agreement, the human body too may sense the stilling of the air as heaviness, as suction, as pressure against skin and ears. This shared silence, where both human and non-human life experiences a pause, casts a dreamlike quality across the environment. And when shaking later breaks this silence, the memory of it gains new meaning. The still air was not imagined but part of seismic preparation, a harbinger painted across the sky before the earth delivered its force. Research into the role of atmospheric pressure is fragmentary yet suggestive. Instruments sometimes detect changes in ionization or gaseous emissions in the days before quakes. These small releases, invisible to the naked eye, may alter the ion content of the air, creating conditions that feel subtly oppressive. Some studies note that animals respond especially acutely to these changes, while sensitive humans may record symptoms days in advance. And though the body cannot consciously identify ionisation, it translates disturbance into dizziness, headaches, or unease. The nervous system, unable to distinguish source, merely signals that something outside the ordinary has occurred. The mystery deepens when we consider how finely tuned migratory species are to geomagnetic and atmospheric shifts. Birds navigating continents respond to pressures invisible in the sky, traveling entire oceans guided only by subtle cues in the air and earth. If such sensitivity keeps them alive, then humans too, sharing much of the same biology, may retain fragments of this gift. Perhaps it no longer guides migration for us, but instead stirs quietly before disasters, appearing suddenly in the form of headaches or tense muscles, then vanishing again until the ground rumbles. Fragments of a lost survival skill may, from time to time, awaken in us in the form of sensations we cannot explain. The slow heaviness of air pressure serves another purpose as well. It reminds us that bodies and the earth are not separate. Every inhalation we take mingles the planet with our blood. With every moment, our lungs translate external pressure into internal balance, maintaining the narrow equilibrium necessary for life. Thus, when the atmosphere shifts, even in delicate increments, our perception cannot help but register. To imagine that changing stress along fault lines sends ripples as high as the clouds is to appreciate that the body and the planet are bound in dialogue at all times. Their conversation may become louder when disaster approaches, but it never truly ceases. When people recall these sensations after earthquakes, they often do so with wonder, sometimes fear. For them, discomfort transforms into confirmation, as they realize the tension they carried was not solely of body and mind but also of the land itself. They had been carrying, unwittingly, a signal from the earth in their own tissues. Many recount that they did not believe their feelings until the quake struck, whereupon memory stitched together cause and effect. Such experiences, repeated through many lives, grow into stories that link subjective sensations to objective events. Though skeptics caution against overinterpretation, the persistence of these accounts cannot be erased. And to those who lived them, the memory is a form of private testimony that no dismissal can undo. It is soothing, when drifting into these reflections, to realize that the mystery is not about fear alone but about connection. What people describe in the heaviness of air, in the ache of the head, in the tightening of ears, is not only an omen of destruction but also a lived reminder that we are physically tethered to the restless planet below. We are not separate from its shifts but breathing within them, participants rather than bystanders. The signals may disturb us, but they also invite us into understanding that our atmosphere is not steady, our ground not still, and our bodies not insulated. In resting with this idea, one finds not terror but intimacy, the sense that we are deeply woven into the structure of a living, moving earth. The continuity of this pattern may one day become scientific certainty. For now, it remains a field of possibility, stitched with stories and sensations, rich with wonder even without definitive proof. And in the gentle hum of nighttime thought, that wonder becomes its own comfort. To realize that the very air pressing softly upon your skin may carry whispers of earth, to imagine that your body could feel these whispers before science records them, is to experience life as a continuum of sensation stretching beyond conscious awareness. It is to recognize that the air and the earth, though seemingly separate, move together, converging within us in ways that speak of a deeper rhythm. By resting in this rhythm, we can allow our minds to float further, lulled by the idea that perception itself is endless, a current that pulls us gently toward hidden truths spoken long before the quake arrives. As stories and testimonies accumulate across cultures, the question naturally arises, what has science discovered about these sensations, and can they be measured with the instruments of modern inquiry? For centuries, the accounts of those who felt earthquakes beforehand have remained in the twilight between folklore and accepted fact, admired by some, dismissed by others. With the arrival of modern seismology in the 19th century and the gradual perfection of measurement in the centuries that followed, one might expect that human testimonies would gradually lose significance. Yet, paradoxically, the persistence of these accounts continues to draw attention even among scientists, precisely because prediction remains so elusive. No machine has yet offered humanity the consistent advance notice it dreams of, and so, quietly, researchers have returned to the possibility that perhaps human bodies themselves carry subtle capacities that might assist where instruments fail. There is, however, an undeniable tension at the heart of this inquiry. Science, by its very nature, demands consistency, repetition, measurable outcomes that can be verified across time and space. The lived experience of earthquake sensitivity, on the other hand, is inconsistent, often irregular, felt by some individuals but not others, surfacing during certain quakes but absent in others. This irregularity leads many to dismiss the possibility outright, attributing perceptions to anxiety, coincidence, or memory distortions. And yet, the mystery remains unsolved, for the fact that prediction through scientific instruments is itself far from perfected leaves the debate open-ended. This paradox, fallible science and fallible sensation orbiting the same unsolved question, invites us to pause and reflect more deeply on the nature of knowledge itself. In recent decades, researchers in various countries have attempted to bring structured analysis to human sensitivity. Studies have been launched in earthquake-prone regions like Japan, China, Italy, Greece, and the western United States, where communities live in constant awareness of seismic threat. Volunteers have been asked to record any unusual physical sensations, headaches, dizziness, unease in daily logs, which are then compared to seismic activity in the region. Some studies report clusters of sensations preceding earthquakes more often than chance would predict. Others show ambiguous or negative results. The data, scattered and incomplete, refuses to confirm the phenomenon beyond doubt, but equally refuses to extinguish the suspicion that something real is occurring beneath the veil of human sensation. For example, in certain hospitals in Japan, careful records of patient visits reveal spikes in complaints of headaches, dizziness, and anxiety in the days preceding major earthquakes. While correlation does not prove causation, the alignment of symptoms and seismic activity remains striking. Similarly, in parts of China, health records show clusters of unexplained discomfort or insomnia in populations near fault lines shortly before significant shaking. These findings are not conclusive, yet they form intriguing patterns, suggesting that the phenomenon may not be isolated randomness but part of a deeper, hidden relationship between biology and geology. The nervous system, electric in essence, may be quietly responding to energy and atmospheric changes in ways too subtle for instruments but not too subtle for human beings, at least for some. The most difficult barrier is the inconsistency. Where one quake triggers widespread reports of unease, another of equal magnitude may arrive with no visible forewarning in human sensation. This irregularity raises the possibility that multiple factors, from weather patterns to fault characteristics, influence whether signals appear. Scientists note that quakes preceded by particular types of foreshocks or underground stress releases may generate stronger electromagnetic or atmospheric cues, more easily felt by living organisms. Others may occur too abruptly, offering little time for sensations to accumulate. Thus the unreliability becomes not evidence of falsehood but a reflection of the complexity of seismic processes themselves. Adding to this complexity is the difficulty of subjective reporting. Memory is selective, and after a disaster, people naturally recall sensations with heightened significance. A headache that might otherwise be forgotten becomes meaningful once the ground shakes. This is the challenge that plagues many studies, distinguishing genuine foreperception from retrospective association. Yet even with this skepticism, the consistent categories of reported symptoms, ear pressure, headaches, nausea, unexplained dread, remain too aligned across decades to ignore. The reports exist not as isolated imaginings but as categories of sensation repeated across geography and time. Some scientific inquiries have stepped beyond symptom logs to explore physiological measurements during earthquakes. Experiments using brainwave monitoring and heart rate tracking reveal subtle shifts in some individuals before seismic events. Increases in stress hormones, irregularities in heartbeat, and fluctuations in electroencephalographic patterns have been observed in controlled studies conducted in earthquake-prone regions. Though such findings remain tentative, they point toward the possibility that the human body reacts unconsciously to environmental shifts long before the mind integrates them into conscious experience. It is as if the nervous system operates as an early warning system that struggles to translate its language into consistent signals we can record and rely upon. One of the more controversial fields of inquiry focuses on electromagnetic fields. Scientists have noted that shifts in the Earth's crust can release bursts of electromagnetic radiation, sometimes detectable hours or days before quakes. Such fields may in turn interact with the nervous systems of living beings. Experiments suggest that animals, particularly migratory species, respond strongly to electromagnetic fluctuations. Humans, while less overtly guided by them, may still be affected, though in subtler ways: headaches, confusion, unease. This raises a tantalizing possibility that the true language of early seismic forewarning lies not in direct shaking of the ground but in the invisible alteration of fields permeating air and body alike. If true, then sensations felt by certain individuals may not be psychic at all, but biological reactions to electromagnetic stress beyond the awareness of ordinary consciousness. Even within the scientific community, the debate remains unresolved. Some dismiss these paths of thought entirely, viewing testimony and scattered studies as insufficient evidence. Others, more open-minded, see them as an invitation to explore further, not because they hold certainty but because they sense potential. In this gap between doubt and belief lies something profoundly human: the willingness to wonder even when data resists. For those listening quietly at night, the story becomes less about graphs and measurements than about our relationship with knowledge itself. Just as earthquakes reveal the limits of our power over the earth, the testimonies of sensitive individuals reveal the limits of our methods of understanding. We are reminded that knowledge depends not only on instruments but also on openness to possibility. This tension adds an almost poetic layer to the mystery. On one hand, science seeks precision, advancing with caution, measuring the measurable, reluctant to embrace ambiguity. On the other, human beings continue to describe experiences that resist tidy categories, persistent enough to defy dismissal. Together they create a landscape where certainty and uncertainty coexist. It is within such landscapes that wonder thrives. For listeners drifting into sleep, there is a calmness in remembering that not everything need be resolved, that mystery itself holds value, that to rest in uncertainty can be as comforting as reaching a conclusion. It is interesting, too, to recall that many fields of science once began with anecdotal mystery. Thunder was once explained only through myth, dreams once dismissed as meaningless illusions. Both later proved to carry immense significance in understanding nature and the human mind. Perhaps earthquake sensitivity, still lingering at the margins of knowledge, belongs to this same tradition, a reminder that today's unanswered testimonies may be tomorrow's field of inquiry. The stories of people who felt quakes before they came need not be seen as superstition, but as data awaiting translation by instruments yet to be invented. To reflect on this is to acknowledge the humility required in facing Earth itself. We can capture vibrations in machines, measure energy in numbers, chart tectonic plates across the globe, but we still struggle to peer ahead, to step into the moments before. On that threshold, humanity remains vulnerable, reliant on anticipation, suspicion, stories. And perhaps, within that vulnerability, there is hidden strength too. For when science falters, the raw sensitivity of the body whispers softly, quietly enough to be doubted, but insistent enough to be remembered. As thought flows further, sleep comes nearer, the theme becomes almost meditative, sensation and skepticism, intuition and data, side by side as partners in uncertainty. The body may know more than we admit. The mind may translate less than it perceives. Between earthquakes and awareness lies a twilight space, filled not with certainty but with echoes, shadows, sensations half understood. To welcome this twilight is to recognize that the story of earthquake sensitivity is not finished. It continues to breathe in experiments, in testimonies, in dreams, in refusals and affirmations alike. And for those who listen closely, it continues to soothe, not with clarity, but with the quiet assurance that mystery itself still belongs to us. The more closely we listen to these testimonies of sensing earthquakes before they arrive, the more we begin to see that they rarely exist in isolation. People who describe such sensitivities often report similar experiences with changes in weather, storms, and shifts in the natural environment long before they occur. Their awareness is not limited to the trembling of the ground but extends into the air, the sky, and the subtle patterns that precede atmospheric change. For many, this creates a picture not of an isolated phenomenon but of a broader gift or perhaps a broader survival instinct that unites the sensing of earthquakes with the centuries-old human habit of predicting storms, rainfall, and seasonal shifts through the body itself. It is here that the boundary between environmental sensitivity and seismic anticipation dissolves, and we begin to recognize that what we are truly exploring is the forgotten capacity of the human body to dwell in deep relationship with its surroundings. Consider how ancient communities lived without satellites, barometers, or modern forecasting systems, and yet survived by reading the voice of the land and sky. Farmers knew when rains would arrive not only through observing clouds but through subtle cues in their own bodies. Fishers along coasts spoke of aching bones before tempests rolled across the seas. Shepherds felt unusual weariness before winds thrashed across plains. These forms of prediction, sometimes called folk meteorology, were essential survival strategies. Though now overshadowed by the certainties of radar and scientific models, they remind us that the body acts as a living barometer, sensitive to pressure, humidity, electric fields, and magnetic shifts. The overlap with earthquake sensitivity is striking, for those who feel tremors in advance often also speak of sensing weather long before official forecasts give warning. Many of these perceptions revolve around the same physiological themes we already trace: changes in ear pressure, migraines, dizziness, mood disturbances. Before a storm, barometric pressure falls, triggering the same discomforts people report before earthquakes. Before lightning, shifts in atmospheric electricity create tingling sensations or unease. In both cases, the body is perceiving changes invisible to the eye, changes that exist outside conscious awareness but are undeniably real. It is not a leap, then, to connect such perception to earthquakes as well, where subterranean stress sends ripples upward into the same domains of pressure and electricity. In this way, earthquake sensitivity becomes not a separate mystery but part of a broader continuum of environmental sensitivity, one that some individuals still embody with unusual intensity. There are records across cultures of people being celebrated for what might today be called hypersensitivity to the environment. In coastal villages, elders known to feel the storm before it arrived guided communities to safety. In mountain regions, shepherds claimed their aching joints foretold landslides or snowfalls. In plains regions, farmers told stories of relatives who grew restless before strong winds swept across fields. These testimonies echo word for word the same categories we encounter with earthquakes: discomfort, heaviness, fatigue, anxiety. Pattern repeated becomes tradition, and tradition repeated becomes cultural wisdom. This wisdom may be quiet, no longer taken as authoritative in the age of satellites and seismic networks, yet it lingers as memory, waiting for us to realize anew that human bodies remain instruments of an ancient kind, capable of reading changes woven into the atmosphere and earth alike. For some individuals, this sensitivity is not a burden but a gift they learn to trust. There are those who keep journals, noting each time they sense pressure or unease, watching as storms or tremors later confirm their impressions. Over time, patterns emerge. Some people claim accuracy rates far higher than chance, describing lives attuned to rhythms that lie beneath the threshold for most. In speaking of this, they often mention not only earthquakes but weather shifts, rainfall, and even volcanic unrest. Their experience suggests less a specific ability than a general orientation. Their nervous system seems porous to the world, receiving signals others fail to notice. Though difficult to quantify, such accounts feel like echoes of an older human normal, a state of being where all people lived in continuous conversation with the land. It may be that the decline of such capacities in the general population is less about their true disappearance and more about their masking by the constant noise of modern life. Surrounded by machines, insulated from natural airflows in climate-controlled rooms, bathed in artificial light, distracted by a torrent of information, our bodies rarely dwell in the silence necessary to perceive subtle shifts. Yet those who live more quietly, closer to the earth, often describe stronger impressions. Farmers, shepherds, fishers, mountain dwellers, people who rise and sleep with natural light, often report sensations more faithfully. It is as if the body, deprived of its ancient dialogues by technology, whispers only faintly for most, yet still speaks clearly in those whose lives remain attuned to the environment. Earthquake sensitivity, like weather intuition, may thus be less a rare genetic gift and more a form of continuity available to all, should the conditions of life allow it to flourish. Scientists exploring this broader environmental sensitivity have noted striking overlaps. Those who suffer pressure-related headaches during storms often describe similar discomfort before seismic events. Patients sensitive to humidity changes sometimes report bodily agitation before quakes. This intersection suggests that the mechanisms may be linked shared pathways of barometric and electromagnetic perception. If this is the case, then earthquake sensitivity becomes less supernatural and more natural, simply an extension of abilities we already acknowledge in relation to weather. Seen this way, the phenomenon is less about anomaly and more about remembering that the body remains in conversation with the conditions in which it lives. It is worth dwelling for a moment on how extraordinary this conversation is. When the body anticipates weather, it is translating shifts in air pressure and humidity into neurological and emotional signals. When the body anticipates earthquakes, it may be translating electromagnetic waves, ground emissions, or atmospheric ionization into similar sensations. These processes occur involuntarily, without conscious thought, and echo across every living being. We stand as instruments amid a grand orchestra, often unaware of the music until it crescendos in storm or quake. The gift of sensitivity may be nothing more than the ability to hear a fragment of melody before others do, to recognize in a faint vibration the chorus that soon arrives. To frame it this way is to bring comfort rather than fear, to treat the phenomenon not as burden but as song. Of course, not every perception is accurate, and not every sensation precedes disaster. One must acknowledge the unevenness of experience. But therein lies a truth familiar to weather prediction itself. Even advanced forecasting systems, armed with satellites and sophisticated algorithms, rarely achieve perfect accuracy. Nature resists full predictability, retaining mystery even when mapped to precision. How much more should we expect the fallible human body to wrestle with ambiguity? Yet just because prediction is imperfect does not mean it lacks meaning. The ache in a farmer's bones may not forecast every storm, but when storms come, the ache acquires significance. Similarly, the headache or dread before an earthquake may fail often, but when it coincides with disaster, it confirms the body's mysterious awareness. Imperfection does not erase possibility, it highlights it. Ultimately, the link between earthquake sensing and weather sensing leads us back to the profound realization that human beings may once have lived in deeper intimacy with their planet. Imagine ancient tribes watching the sky, feeling the air, listening both with ears and with skin, storing memories of every pattern. For them, survival meant not simply building shelter but learning to live in resonance with the rhythms around them. Clouds, winds, tremors, and tides all carried messages, translated through the body as unease, restlessness, or relief. Those who listened most attentively became guardians of knowledge and guides for their people. Even if the descriptions were woven into myth, the core practice remained practical and embodied science long before instruments, refined not through machines but through memory. As we drift into this awareness, resting in the gentle flow of thought, the idea becomes expansive beyond measure. It suggests that hidden within each of us may remain the quiet remnant of this ancient intimacy, a dormant dialogue waiting to be remembered. Perhaps it surfaces only rarely, perhaps it comes as a quiet ache before storms or an inexplicable heaviness before earthquakes, but it exists nonetheless, whispering in the margins of our perception. To imagine this within ourselves is to feel less separate from nature, more rooted, as if our bones and breath still carry the voice of wind and stone. And in this recognition, there is peace, even amidst disaster, for to feel is to belong, and to belong is to know that we are never entirely alone beneath the restless sky. The union of seismic and meteorological sensitivity widens the theme. It tells us that the story of earthquake awareness is not narrow, not limited, but part of the broader truth of human sensitivity to the living world. It reorients the phenomenon from anomaly to continuity, from mystery to heritage. Even without instruments, people have long intuited change. Even without certainty, they have acted, survived, and remembered. And though science may struggle to explain, the body continues to speak, translating earth and sky together into uneasy whispers that remind us quietly, gently, unforgettably, that the world is alive and we are part of it. And so, lying in darkness, listening to this flow of reflection, one begins to recognize that the mystery of earthquakes is inseparable from the mystery of weather, and that both draw us back into our forgotten relationship with the unseen signals that pass through us every moment. Whether through storms or tremors, pressure or vibration, ion or field, the body carries on its ancient work of listening, even when we no longer consciously acknowledge it. To remember this, in the hazy borderlands between wake and sleep, is to rest in a vast comfort, a recognition that perception itself has no edge, and that in our most fragile moments we remain in dialogue with the earth and sky alike, alive within the same eternal conversation. When the conversation turns from isolated experiences of sensitivity to how entire societies might engage with such abilities, the subject deepens into questions of responsibility, utility, and meaning. For individuals, a strange headache or vibration in the chest may feel like a passing burden, dismissed or hidden. But when we begin to imagine the possibility that a collective awareness, shared among many people, might act as a natural system of early warning, the implications become extraordinary. The sensations that once seemed private and inexplicable might instead be regarded as fragments of a communal signal, the beginnings of a human network capable of complementing science in places where technology still struggles. To see earthquake awareness not only as personal perception but also as social resource expands the mystery into potential. Throughout history, communities often responded collectively to the experiences of their most sensitive members. If one farmer complained of pressure in his skull and another spoke of children restless in the night, others listened. If neighbors noticed birds flying strangely at dusk or sheep refusing to graze, they gathered these warnings into shared memory. Folklore made use of such accounts not as curiosities but as survival tools. The tales preserved within traditions became, in essence, living manuals of disaster preparedness, instructing communities to be watchful when certain signs converged. It becomes striking, therefore, to consider how societies once placed faith not in technologies but in trust in the body, in shared observation, in collective interpretation of signs. In our age, surrounded by satellites and alerts transmitted in seconds, this older wisdom has largely been displaced or forgotten. Yet in places where technology does not fully reach, where seismic networks may lag or where official warnings fail, the intuitions and testimonies of sensitive individuals might still hold value. Imagine rural villages in mountainous terrains, distant islands scattered across the ocean, farming communities with little access to modern monitoring. Here the body's whispers might still be the first line of defense. And though imperfect, even a vague sense of forewarning could make the difference between injury and safety. The role of sensitivity becomes not mystical but practical, reminding us that survival has always been a dialogue between environment and body. Some researchers therefore propose combining human sensitivity with technological monitoring. If communities kept structured records of headaches, dizziness, unease, unusual dreams, and atmospheric impressions, patterns might emerge when compared to small tremors or foresharks recorded by instruments. Over time, a living archive could form, weaving data from machines with experience from bodies. This archive might not predict every event but could gradually refine correlations, offering communities an additional layer of preparedness. Perhaps it would extend beyond earthquakes to storms or volcanic activity, creating a communal map of planetary whispers translated through both steel and skin. The dream of merging human perception with technology is part of a larger vision of resilience. We imagine neighborhoods where citizens are trained not only to recognize signs in the earth and sky but to record them calmly, without fear. We imagine schools teaching children to pay attention to subtle changes, not as superstition but as a form of attunement to their world. In this way, sensations of dizziness or unusual fatigue might become cues to greater awareness rather than private confusion. Such education could transform sensitivity into empowerment, helping young people grow with reverence for the body as a partner of the earth. At a deeper level, considering the social meaning of sensitivity invites us to reflect on the kind of relationship we wish to have with the planet. Do we want to live as though insulated from natural forces, trusting only in machines? Or do we wish to honor the continuity that runs from ancient story to modern testimony, that reminds us of the porousness of our bodies, the responsiveness of our nerves, the intimacy of being positioned not above but within nature? If we consider sensitivity to earthquakes not as an anomaly but as a reminder of this positioning, it becomes something greater than prediction, it becomes a philosophy of belonging. It tells us we are inseparable from the environment we inhabit, that our lives pulse continually in contact with forces beyond us, that to live is to listen whether we realize it or not. Such reflection creates a remarkable atmosphere for those drifting into sleep. It transforms fear into humility, unease into relationship. The thought that someone's dizziness before a quake was not meaningless discomfort but part of a massive web of interaction reframes what it means to feel. Even suffering can become context when seen as dialogue. The headache, the heaviness, the ringing, the dread, these no longer appear as personal weaknesses but as evidence that the earth and the body share a constant current, sometimes benevolent, sometimes warning, always intimate. This realization, when embraced softly, nurtures calm, that we are not alone, that our bodies are not isolated, that even in fragility there is connection to something vast. Of course, skepticism will always have its place. No society can base disaster management solely on perceptions without risking confusion or false alarms. Yet even here lies social value. By teaching communities to differentiate sensation from imagination, by training them in observation without panic, societies could bring wisdom back into balance. Sensitivity then becomes not a replacement for instruments but an additional layer, just as folklore once existed beside ritual, and ritual beside science. In our modern world, such integration may be more needed than ever, for as resilient as technology may be, no system is beyond failure, and no network is beyond collapse. The human body, however, is everywhere, always present, always listening. That universality is its power. There is another social meaning to consider, the possibility of belonging through shared experience. When individuals admit their unexplainable sensations, when they confess to each other that they too felt restless, heavy, or unwell before the quake, they often feel relief that they are not alone. Entire groups may recognize common experience where once isolation prevailed. This recognition builds community, creates dialogue, inspires new forms of trust. Instead of dismissing these reports as strange, society might embrace them as a form of emotional connection, reminding us that within disaster lies solidarity. These shared conversations help transform the solitary burden of sensitivity into collective meaning, into reminders that what isolates us may also unite us. In this way, the phenomenon invites us to reimagine what preparedness means. Preparedness is not only about stockpiling food or strengthening buildings but also about cultivating awareness. Awareness at its deepest level is not simply intellectual, it is bodily, emotional, intuitive. By encouraging awareness, by honoring both technological monitoring and human sensation, societies craft resilience that extends into every corner of life. Preparedness becomes cultural, woven into how people live rather than imposed externally. It becomes part of belonging to a landscape, part of listening not just with instruments but with nervous systems, communities, and shared heritage. There is a gentle irony here. The very qualities most doubted, the fragility of subjective sensation, the inconsistency of human experience, may also be the qualities that enrich society the most. For what is community if not shared subjectivity? And what is culture if not the transmission of experiences too subtle to be measured? The blending of seismic sensitivity with social meaning simply replays a dynamic that has defined humanity from the beginning, the weaving of observation, story, and survival into communal life. To recognize this is to restore dignity to experiences long dismissed, to frame them as threads in the larger tapestry of how people endure and thrive. Imagine the future where scientists and communities collaborate, pooling body records and machine measurements, overlaying maps of foresharks with maps of migraines, pressure sensations, restless nights. Patterns emerge, sometimes faint, sometimes bold. With time, predictive systems may use these integrated cues to warn in ways otherwise impossible. Even if prediction never becomes absolute, the act of noticing, sharing, and respecting human experience may itself save lives by fostering vigilance. The body thus becomes both subject of mystery and tool of resilience, rejoined to technology not as rival but as partner. To those lying quietly in the dark, this vision has a certain serenity. It allows us to feel at once connected and empowered. For too often disaster makes us feel powerless, cut off from safety, cast adrift in forces beyond control. Yet to remember that we carry in our own bodies traces of awareness, even if subtle, softens that helplessness. It gifts us with the sense that we are not merely at the mercy of earthquakes but engaged in their story, receiving whispers before the shout of motion. Whether or not we heed them, whether or not they prove precise, the whispers are there, reminding us that the dialogue between earth and human continues every moment of life. And so, the path arcs from private discomfort to communal opportunity, from anecdotal testimony to collective meaning. What seems like isolated burden becomes possibility for social resilience. What feels like weakness becomes continuity of heritage. The vision is not of abandoning science but of embracing humanity as part of it, extending its reach into the subtle intelligence of the body. This reimagining carries a calm nobility, offering comfort to all who hear it, for it assures that our sensations are not meaningless chaos but part of a larger structure of belonging. In surrendering to this thought, we drift into deeper relaxation, touched by the awareness that disaster and community are bound together, and that in listening closely to both body and earth, we may rediscover forms of wisdom older than history, waiting now to be remembered anew. Across every layer of this journey, from the folklore of distant centuries to the subtle physiology of the human body, from the testimonies of individuals surviving disaster to the cautious experiments of modern science, a single truth hums beneath the surface: the relationship between the earth and the human being is deeper, older, and more mysterious than any measurement can fully capture. To speak of people who feel earthquakes before they happen is not to claim perfection in prediction, nor to set aside science, but to recognize that within each of us lies an ancient inheritance, a body still whispering with the rhythms of the planet. In dwelling on this mystery, we have walked slowly through voices scattered across history. We have listened to ancient seers whose warnings became legend, to farmers and parents who remembered strange sensations before great quakes struck their villages, to survivors who woke with dread or stumbled with dizziness before the land itself shifted beneath their feet. We have seen how accounts repeat themselves across centuries: heaviness in the air, ringing in the ears, unease in the chest, sudden exhaustion, disturbing dreams. The universality of these accounts suggests continuity, binding the present not only to a scientific frontier but to humanity's oldest perception, the capacity to live not apart from the world but within its pulse. We have reflected, too, on animals whose behavior often foreshadows earthquakes with striking clarity. Dogs whining restlessly, birds scattering in sudden clouds, fish leaping against invisible tremors. These become our reminders that life itself is never deaf to the language of the earth. Humans, bound by the same biological architecture, may carry subtler forms of this awareness, muted, uneven, but persistent. When the ground prepares its convulsion, it may stir every part of living creation, and those attuned enough may notice its whispers before others know to listen. From this reflection, we traveled into the terrain of the human body, tracing the magnificence of the inner ear, the delicacy of the nervous system, the vast porousness of skin, the shifting signals of the brain, the resonance of heart and lungs with atmospheric pressure. We considered how infrasound presses invisibly against the eardrum, how magnetism and ionotation trickle into neural currents, how barometric changes slip into sinus and bone, how electricity strikes not lightning but the hidden architecture of our perception. We saw that the body is not a closed vessel but an open receiver, absorbing through every pore the vibrational signatures of the world. To be human, then, is to dwell perpetually within communication, sometimes silent to our conscious minds, but never ceasing in the dialogue that life maintains with the landscape. Skepticism entered our path as well, reminding us that memory is flawed, that coincidence creates patterns where none exist, that subjective reports may mislead. And yet, we kept listening, and we found persistence. Across centuries, across continents, across cultures so different they could hardly have spoken to one another, the same impressions were repeated, again and again. To dismiss them as imagination is to ignore the possibility that what science cannot yet prove still deserves wonder. After all, every field of knowledge once lived in uncertainty, every universal truth began as a whisper defying comprehension. Perhaps in this persistence we find both humility and strength. We then reached the broader perspective, recognizing that these perceptions often stretch beyond earthquakes and into weather, storms, and the ever-changing atmosphere. Those who feel the Earth's restlessness also often feel the sky's. They sense storms through the same headaches, fatigue, and pressure that precede tremors. This overlap taught us that the phenomenon is less a narrow anomaly than part of a wide continuum, a reminder that sensitivity to the environment is an echo of the life humanity once lived as one species among many, listening to winds, rains, and distant thunder not as spectators but as participants of the same world. From individuals we shifted to communities, wondering what could happen if sensations and testimonies were collected, not dismissed. We imagined villages pooling their observations, cities overlaying human reports with seismic and atmospheric measures, scientists building archives that map dizziness, headaches, and dreams as faithfully as they map vibrations and faults. We saw that sensitivity need not be isolated experience but could become a social resource, imperfect but valuable, one more layer of resilience in a world always vulnerable to natural force. And through this journey, beneath every detail and reflection, ran the deeper current, the recognition that to feel the earth before it moves is also to remember who we are. We are not apart from this planet, not insulated minds floating in abstraction, but bodies breathing with the air, vibrating with the ground, resonating with unseen forces that pass through us at every moment. Whether through folklore, biology, or science, this insight returns with quiet insistence: not everything is measurable, but everything is connected. In our most fragile moments, we rediscover intimacy with the world, humbled by the reality that life is not lived against nature but within it. This recognition need not frighten us. It may, instead, offer comfort. For even amid uncertainty, even in the darkness of the unknown, there is peace in knowing that we belong to rhythms older than speech, older than cities, older than memory. To feel dizzy before a quake, to suffer a headache before storms, to dream vividly before disaster, these are not signs of weakness but reminders that our bodies are not machines but instruments, playing back to us melodies of the earth we habitually ignore. The music may come with discomfort, but it is music nonetheless, the quiet song of connection, unbroken and eternal. And now, as this long journey of reflection draws gently toward its close, it is time to let thought ease into rest. We have walked beside folklore and science, beside skepticism and sensitivity, beside the whispers of air and the trembling of stone. The story has shown us fear transmuted into meaning, uncertainty transformed into philosophy, private sensation reborn as community's reminder. In following this quiet stream of narrative, we have not declared certainty, but we have embraced mystery. We have not solved the riddle, but we have honored its wonder. And honoring wonder, perhaps above all, is what allows us to rest. To those of you who have accompanied this journey, lying in darkness, listening as thought drifts more slowly, I thank you. May these words have softened your mind into calm, offering you images and ideas that do not demand urgency but encourage peace. May the mystery of earthquake sensitivity remind you that you are woven into your world more deeply than you imagined, that your breath, your heartbeat, your sensations are part of the planet's own restless life. And may this awareness carry you not into fear, but into the profound comfort of belonging, even as you drift into the quiet fields of sleep. Good night to you, dear listeners. May you rest safely, may your dreams carry you gently, and may you always remember that the earth, in its silence and its tremors alike, is never separate from you. It speaks, you hear, and in that dialogue you are always, endlessly, at home.